Hello, good people. Hi, how you doing? Hello, Mary is Tulsa Fox. Hi, Mary. Hi, Katie. Hi, Chicken Johnny. How you guys doing today? Oy, let me see if I can get myself comfortable here. Hey, I found out something interesting today. You know what happens whenever you take a sweet potato that you're planning on doing something with later and you put it up on top of your grow tent on top of the grow lights? You know what happens? It starts producing slips. I haven't. I was planning on putting this into a container with some sand and water and getting the slips started on it. It's starting to produce all by itself, so I'm going to have to work with that here in the fairly near future. How's everybody doing tonight? Let's see, we got at least one person in here. So Mary wanted me to talk to everybody a little bit about types of fungi before we get started, because there's a bit of a misconception about what mycorrhizae fungi are. Oh, hey, John. Oh, you're here, but you haven't made it home yet. All right. Well, drive safe. John's out there. He was helping a friend get home earlier. So there are different types of fungi out there, and just because you've got wood chips or hay or something like that in your garden, and you pull the chips back and you see little white threads running through them, that doesn't mean that you have mycorrhizal fungi. You have mycelium of a type of fungus, but it's not necessarily mycorrhizal fungi. And chances are it probably isn't mycorrhizal fungi. So we'll go over the types of different fungi really quick. We've got your saprotrophic fungi, which are the ones that decompose dead material. Chances are, if you've got wood chips or hay or something like that, that's what you're seeing is the saprotrophic fungi. Um, then we've got parasitic fungi. Those are the fungi that come up and they attack living plants. Powdery mildew, for example, might be an example of a parasitic fungus. It's attacking the living tissue. Then, of course, you've got endophytic fungi. Endophytic fungi are the type of fungi that live and exist inside of the plants themselves, inside of the living plant tissues, the stuff that you see above the ground. Those are endophytic fungi. Interesting little tidbit. There's a significant amount of fungi in almost all plants on Earth. There are some scientists that believe that it might be the fungi themselves that cause those plants to come into existence in the first place. Kind of a curious rabbit hole that I don't want to go down today. And then, of course, you've got mycorrhizae fungi, which are the type of fungi that interact with the roots of your plants and have a variety of symbiotic benefits that they share with each other. And that's what we're talking about tonight. Of course, tonight we're talking about mycorrhizal fungi, and we're going to go to our website here. Go ahead and manipulate it. This is the greencountryagroforestry.com website, which is now up and running. Not entirely complete, but you can always go buy a t-shirt or a mug or something like that from it. And we'll be going to my show notes, which I always put in our blog. So go to the blog post. Of course, it's not just my show notes. There's about every other day I'll put something out. And today we're talking about the Internet of Trees. So we'll go over here. And we'll start out with a nice little picture there. And I'll say hi to everybody who happens to be in the stream at the moment. All right, let me refresh the chat and see what's going on here. Hi, Free Handley Maid. All right, let's get to this. Okay, so a few years ago, I came across a TED Talk video where a forestry researcher by the name of Suzanne Simard was describing an experiment that she conducted 25 years previously. So it was somewhere around 1995 that she conducted this experiment. This was up in British Columbia. The brief short form of the experiment is she had planted an area with a mix of birch, fir, and cedar trees, a total of 80 specimens in all, and covered some of the trees with shade cloth to limit their photosynthesis. And then she placed plastic bags over all of the trees, each one individually, to isolate them. Then she took radioactively tagged carbon dioxide, it was a C14 tagged carbon dioxide, and injected it into some of the bags. She left the site and came back sometime later, an hour or two later, and used her Geiger counter on the trees that she had injected the atmosphere around them with the radio tagged carbon dioxide and discovered that, lo and behold, yes, just as expected, the trees had photosynthesized. They'd taken that carbon up into the leaves. They were now part of the tree. So it made the Geiger counter go when she ran the Geiger counter over it. That's to be expected. No shock there. Then she went to some of the bagged and shaded trees that were nearby and tested those. And she found that the radioactive isotopes had also been taken up by those trees as well. And I included a link for it here in the blog where you can go and view this video at your leisure. She starts talking about the experiment at 4:52. Now, I'm not going to play this for you right now because that would just take extra time. And if you were following along and read the blog ahead of time, you'd already have watched this video. All right. So there's some interesting implications that are presented by this experiment because carbon dioxide, whenever it's photosynthesized by the plant is making starches and sugars. We know, and this is what I knew about mycorrhizal fungi already, that the plants will send those sugars and starches down into the roots where they're taken up by the fungus that are in association with the roots. And the fungus will feed on that sugar and starch. And in exchange, the fungus goes out and sends its hyphae out into the soil around to harvest water and mineral resources, phosphorus, for example, and bring it to the plants. Something that we pretty much knew about mycorrhizal associations up to this point. What we didn't know is that it's not just a one-way exchange of carbon going down to the fungus and then minerals going up to the tree. The fungus only consume about 30% of the carbon that they take in from the trees. What do they do with the rest of it? Well, what they do with the rest of it is when they form associations with other trees, if those trees are in need of that carbon, they can send it up to the tree as well. If that tree happens to be producing something that the network as a whole can use, if there's a need for a product that tree makes or that plant makes, it can send it down. So it's basically paying for the carbon that's receiving. Of course, this means that a tree that's in the network that's shaded out can receive carbon as if it had photosynthesized, even though it didn't. It was providing something else to that relationship. Well, that's a mind-blowing concept. So I've been aware of the mycorrhizal fungi already. I knew that there were different types, things like that. This knowledge is kind of what we would call kind of neat. I don't know if it's I don't know if it's like jump up out of your tub and run streaking down the streets of Syracuse neat, like Archimedes did. All right. Now, I was also aware of this growing trend called food forests. You may have heard of them. You may have seen a video too where people come on, they talk about how they're planting a whole bunch of trees and bushes, and sometimes they overplant them and crowd them really close, and talk about how they're going to be able to eat the produce from the trees. That seemed a bit silly to me because a lot of the projects, whenever you look at them, you see a lot of fruit trees, but there's no real protein to speak of. So start wondering how many jars of home canned peaches a person has to eat before they just give up and go and buy themselves a nice juicy steak. Now, I found the concept of layers kind of intriguing. I mean, who wouldn't want to be able to get 6 different harvests from the same square foot of space, stacking everything vertically like that? Of course, the problem that occurred to me is probably the same problem that occurs to everyone else. Is the further down you go into the layers, the less and less sunlight is reaching those plants to the point where you get to the ground cover layer. Those guys have to be able to survive on next to no light at all. But if this mutual networks of mycorrhizal fungi is a thing, maybe that's a way around it. And maybe that's a way it actually works out there in a naturally occurring forest, because I know I've walked out there and I've seen places where things are growing in the shade and they're growing really well. And a lot of those plants, if you were to look at them being sold from a nursery, they would come from the nursery with a recommendation that they needed to be planted in full sun. So I scroll down and have a little picture here of a little path through a forest. Of course, you can see down here close to the ground, everything's in deep shade, but you still do have grasses growing. Of course, this is a lane. It's not going to have much growing in it, but they have all kinds of undergrowth growing here in low light conditions. So either these guys have to be able to make do with very little sunlight, or there's something else going on, like those mycorrhizal associations. Possibly, maybe. Mary says, like homework. Let me see. Trying to find Recent comments. Apparently, I'm not getting all the comments, or there's not many people in here tonight. Um, like homework, Mary. What are you talking about? Like homework? Oh, like oh, okay, yeah. Watching the video ahead of time. Yeah, kind of like homework. Kind of like homework. Hello, Miss Bose Grows. All right. I was just checking to see if anybody had any questions or comments or complaints so far. Because, all right, I don't like baloney. Seems like an odd way to commence a paragraph, but allow me a minute to expound upon my deep-seated and utter loathing for that most dismal of lunch meats. Growing up, money was scarce, and to compound matters, my mother was not an able cook. She was a teacher, which explains both the deficiency in culinary skills as well as the empty pocketbook. Evening meals generally consisted of whatever could be made from hamburger meat and the contents of a box, with the contents of a can heated up as an afterthought. For meals, other meals, a slice of the least expensive bologna and some mustard sandwiched between what might at a distance be mistaken for bread was usually the general fare. So I learned to forage out of necessity. Uh, I spent several years in southwestern Missouri. Most of the Ozarks in that area have been clear cut from 1880 to 1920. At that time, the lack of any trees worth harvesting for timber caused the timber industries to shut down. From the 1920s up until the 1950s, they made efforts to reforest the area, and a lot of the things that they planted were simply just to hold the soil in place. So there were a lot of really fast growing trees, not exactly replacing everything that got cut out in the first place. Um, at least 50% of everything in that region is juniper. They call them cedar, but they're a type of juniper. I guess it's worth mentioning there's more than one type of cedar tree. There's true cedar trees, um, and then there's the juniper cedars, and they belong to entirely different families. The juniper cedars, of course, is probably what Dr. Simard was growing in her experiment. Most likely the western red cedar, which is related to the juniper. The giant redwoods, incidentally, are also relatives of the juniper. It's that category of trees. The true cedars are members of the Pinacea family, so they're in that same category as the firs, for example. All right. So if you're wondering, if you're watching that particular video and catching up, you're wondering why it was that cedar wasn't in communication with fir if they had a similar mycorrhizal association. That's why. Okay. So I spent a lot of time foraging, running around a hillside. This was east facing next to Lake Taneycomo, just a few miles away from where the Mark Twain National Forest is. Incidentally, the Mark Twain National Forest and that particular hillside didn't really have any difference in them. The forest was established after the clear cut had already taken place, so it had exactly the same things in it. Um, Everything that had grown up there was maybe 60 to 80 years since the cutting occurred, so the only things other than the trees that have been deliberately planted had been either seed or seedling at the time that the clear cutting was over. But there were still persimmons, plums, cherry trees, lots of blackberry patches that could be found, a few black walnuts. Um, I noticed the best places to forage receive sunlight for about half the day, but it still wasn't uncommon to find small trees or bushes growing almost completely in the shade and still bearing fruit. Well, hearing Dr. Samar talk about plants within a region forming mutual mycorrhizal associations to pass sugars, among other things, up, well, that triggered a recollection of having seen wild blueberries growing in a portion of the woods where they couldn't be getting more than about 2 hours worth of sunlight a day. Commercial growers put their fields out in full sun and put 12 feet of space between plants. The common wisdom is these plants require a lot of sunlight. Well, this intrigues me. I had to learn more about these mycorrhizal fungi and what they could do. Water, nitrogen, phosphorus, now sugars too. What else is getting passed through this underground mutual network? And how can I use this to my advantage in designing a system? I got started and I spent a few years working on it and a lot of research. Part of what I researched produced this list. Now, this isn't my data. I stole it and repackaged it and put it into a form where you can click on the images, and these are here in the blog post. You can click on the images And whenever the drop-down menu appears, if it appears, now let's get out of there. There we go. You can choose to save the image. Once you do that, you can print the image at your leisure, which is kind of useful because the way I arrange these, once they print out, you'll have a space here on the left-hand side where you can put your holes in with a hole punch and put them into a 3-ring binder and have your own hard copy of this that you can refer to at any time, which is kind of handy if you're out there in the field and the only thing you have to work with is a cell phone and you don't have that much data on your cell phone. You can just have this as a booklet that you can look at. Let me go take a look at comments real quick. Hi, Donna Griggs. 7 people viewing. Hey, that's more than we started out with. Free Handling Maid says, I have a pasture full of trees and need to learn what types I have. Maybe I'll do a short video. That would be good. Yeah, find out what you already have growing. That might tell you what you can grow and what might go well in your existing situation. All right, let's get back over there to our list. All right, so the way this is laid out, we have the family of tree on the left-hand side. Common name for individual species. For example, here we have, what are these? Actinidacea, genus Actinida. Common name, the kiwis. If you are looking in Plants for a Future, you'll find a bunch of kiwis. I think we mentioned a couple of those week before last. There are some of these that can be grown in zone 7, zone 6, zone 5. I think there's one that can even grow up in zone 4. A lot of these are tropical kiwis, incidentally, but there are ones that grow in the temperate climates. Mullamossima is, no, that's different. That's something else entirely. Sorry, I'm thinking Passiflora. Anyway, over here is the type of mycorrhizal association. Whenever we're talking about mutual networks and mycorrhizal networks, there are generally 2 varieties. There are the endo or arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. They make associations in little pockets inside of the roots. And then there's the ectomycorrhizal, which surround the outside of the root and are making the exchange on the outside of the root. Certain fungi have certain connections, and not all networks are interchangeable. For example, your kiwi is not going to associate with something that uses a different network. For example, here's birch, which is ectomycorrhizal. They're not going to have the same type of fungi, and they're not going to have the same associations. This is, of course, why Dr. Samard's experiment, birch and fir had a communication going with each other, but the cedar, which is a endomycorrhizal or arbuscular mycorrhizal plant, wasn't involved in that conversation. They weren't connected. Okay. So there are hundreds of known species of each of the arbuscular mycorrhizal and ectomycorrhizal fungi, and probably thousands of as of yet unknown that we don't know. There's not a lot of funding available for peer research into mycology, especially when the research produces results that challenge that old Darwinian view of botany, where all the species of plants are there in competition with each other for limited resources. Progress is slow, and one researcher could spend their entire career studying a handful of species within just one genus to produce a few crumbs of information. I see my role in this particular intellectual ecosystem as being someone who comes along and gathers these crumbs together. Hopefully, I can find a way to put the information to work in a practical manner. Science for the sake of science is wonderful, and I wish we had more of it, but practical applications, that's what pays the bills. Okay, speaking of crumbs, here's a couple more. The plants in the family Ericaceae are almost exclusively arbuscular, but within a limited range of species that normally don't form associations with any other family that we know of, at this time anyway. Some notable specimens of that family are blueberry and the cranberry, and that makes the shade-bearing berries of the natural forest a bit of a puzzle. I'm going to put a pin in that for a minute because I want to talk about the other little crumb, which is also somewhat bizarre. So the members of the family Orchidea also form associations with a limited range of mycorrhiza, seemingly with arbuscular habits, and a little extra twist. The orchids have seeds that, for the most part, have no sugars, have no starches, or any other sort of biological fuel to help get a seedling started. So they're completely dependent on their fungal associations in order to get their very first supply of energy. Whenever a seed first germinates, inside that seed coat, you've got the little embryo of the seed, and it's got its first cotyledons, either monocotyledons or dicotyledons. That's a fancy way of saying the first leaves. They're either a single leaf or two leaves. Those are already in the seed. And then there's a source of food, which is usually in the seed. Incidentally, that's what we eat whenever we eat seeds or nuts or things of that nature, grains. That's what gives us fuel, food. But it's also food for that little embryo whenever it first emerges. Orchids don't have that. They have to have a mycorrhizal association to get their first dose of food at all, which makes them really strange and kind of neat. Now, each one of these pages, I think there's 9 of them in all. All you have to do to use them is click on them, right click, save the image, and then you can print it off at your leisure. And we have some interesting plants in this area here. Which page is this on? Page number 2. We get into the family Brassica. The Brassica. I'm not going to try to pronounce that. Latin confuses me. The brassicas, that's horseradish, cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, turnips, rapeseed, what you would call canola. That's also a brassica. Fields and fields and fields of these yellow flowers, little tiny oil seeds in them. The cresses, mustards, radishes. All of these are presumably non-mycorrhizal, although there's a possibility that there may be some form of fungi that associate with even the Brassica families. We just don't know enough right now to be able to say yes or no. There might be, but a lot of Brassicas exude from their roots chemicals that inhibit the growth of fungi in the soil. So it would have to be a very special type of fungus that can make that sort of association and hook up a Brassica. Not saying it's impossible, it's just we don't know at this time if there is one. There's also a few very special ones, which I'll touch on here in a minute. Generally, these are color-coded. The arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi are listed in this sort of magenta pink. The non-mycorrhizal fungi are in gray or white. For example, here, sedges, mostly non-mycorrhizal, some of them ecto. Anyway, let's get past these. I began thinking about those blueberries growing in the woods in the shade. There had to be some sort of bridge between the species, enabling a mutual network to feed the ericaceous plants. Remember, they're on a different network than everything else around them. So they've got things above them shading them, which if they were in a mutual network would be okay because these guys up here would go, hey, you're in the shade, you need some sugar, and they could send it through the network to them. But ericaceous plants are on different networks. So how is it that these blueberries are now in the shade, managing to survive with that limited amount of sunlight? So after digging around in the lists of pages of mycorrhizal associations for information, I found a list that looks promising. And sure enough, on that list, along with heather, crowberry, one that I'm not going to try to pronounce, cranberry, azaleas, rhododendrons, and blueberries, are a couple of species, mountain laurels and Gaultheria, which are both ericoid and ectomycorrhizal. Now we've got the list here. This is page number 4. Here are the members of the Ericaceae family. There's one interesting one, which is the bearberry, which is Uvo ursi. It's a low-growing ground cover found in temperate forests, usually cold climate. This one is ectomycorrhizal, so it'll associate with firs and pines and things of that nature. Other than that, we have all of these ericoids, which are in the orange, and then these two, Gaultheria and Kallima, mountain laurel. And these are both ericoid and ectomycorrhizal. So the idea is, if you wanted to have a mutual network, you would have your ericaceous species down here in the shade going, hey, We're not getting any light. We can't photosynthesize. How are we supposed to produce flowers and berries like this? Somewhere nearby, we have a bridge species, somebody that has both associations with the Ectomycorrhizal fungi, which are associating with the firs and the pines up here, and with the Iroquois down here. So we have the blueberries in the shade, but they have to be able to have a go-between, a middleman. So we have these two varieties. Well, take a look at them. Mountain laurel turns out to be toxic. It's very toxic. As a matter of fact, natives would take mountain laurel and consume it to commit suicide if they wanted to check out early. So not really a great plant to have in your garden for if you're growing for food. If you're an herbalist, there are some herbal applications to mountain laurel, but I would not recommend this for the average gardener. If you're an herbalist and you're using it for medicine and you know what it's for, then maybe, but otherwise I wouldn't recommend it. So I'm still looking for something. What about Gaultheria? What's Gaultheria do for us? Well, it turns out Gaultheria is the genus to which wintergreens belong. Wintergreens are that source of aromatic oils that have been used for as long as I can remember to flavor sweets and toothpastes and combine in ointments to relieve sore muscles and joints. And Gaultheria have been found to grow in close association with evergreen trees. Now, though the literature I was reading at didn't specify what kind of evergreen trees, I'm going to assume that those evergreens are probably ectomycorrhizal and they're members of the Pinaceae family. So fir, larch, spruce, pine, hemlock, and the true cedars, not junipers, not redwoods. All right. Go back to our comments real quick. Hi, Carl's off the grid. How you doing? You can't keep them straight. Yeah, or you can't keep them straight. There'll be a test later. It's a pass-fail test. If you fail, then you die of starvation. Okay, Carl's watching from work. Hello? Pet the dog. Okay, hi dog. How you doing? So Carl got a pecan tree. Pecans are ectomycorrhizal, and he's been having trouble getting blueberries to grow out by the cabin. I'm presuming it's out by the cabin, but the ground out there by the cabin is a mixture of pine trees and maples. Well, I already know, since he's got both pines and maples, if they're forming a mutual association, they've got one of those special little bridge species in between them. Possibly alders, perhaps, maybe a poplar or aspen, cottonwood, something of that nature. The trick is, of course, getting the blueberries looped into that particular network, since that ground doesn't have a bridge species like a mountain laurel or wintergreen. That might have something to do with it. So one thing you might try doing is start out by planting some wintergreen in the area where you're getting ready to plant the blueberries. Let the wintergreen grow for a couple of seasons and see if they can form that association with the pine trees that are nearby. If they can form that association with the pine trees, come in with the blueberries, add the blueberries in. Now the blueberries can have an association with the wintergreens, and they can still get enough carbon, hopefully, maybe. Then there's also the question of pH. I want to check your pH and some other things like that. Mary says, something bad happened with that fungus. With what fungus? Oh, okay, wintergreen, yeah. Cabbages are gangsters, yes. Yeah. Dog's been fed. You've got some poplars. Okay. So going back to our list of trees here. Let me get that there. There we go. Going back to the list of trees, we've got poplars. Now, let's see. I wrote a lot more stuff in here. We'll get to that here in a minute. Let me find poplar. Okay, I told you the blue ones were special. Blue ones are ecto and endo, or avascular mycorrhizal both. So these would be trees that could stand in between those two. Here we have alnus, alder trees, also endo and ecto, and it's further down. All right. Remind me whenever we come back, we'll be at page 6. Okay, here we go. Salicaceae family. Those are poplus or poplar trees, and salix, which are the willow trees. Incidentally, I had an order in with Burnt Ridge Nursery out of Washington for a bunch of trees to come in. One of them was a willow, and unfortunately they ran out and they're having to do a substitution. I guess I can see if they've got a poplar that I can put in the same spot, because really what I want that one for is to be next to a frog pond and sort of join some other different things together. But that would be why you have maple and pine together that are growing together in a good tight forest, is because of the poplar trees that are in there, Carl. That would be why. Incidentally, whenever the logging companies came through and they started cutting down the trees at the end of the 1800s and into the early 1900s, whenever they did reforestation, they didn't know this sort of stuff at all. The research hadn't been done yet. The idea of trees communicating with each other was just ridiculous. It was all, well, it's survival of the fittest. All the trees are in competition with each other, and the ones that are successful get big, and the ones that don't, well, they're not worth that much. They came in and they planted more pine trees in some areas, more maple trees in some areas, but they didn't necessarily come back and plant these scrawny little things that had the weak wood that were messy. Alders and the poplars, the willow trees, wasn't really a whole lot of interest in planting those. And then of course they wonder why the forests that they planted, the new forests, don't fare as well as the old ones did. Aren't these trees supposed to be the strong ones, the ones that got big? Well, why are they not doing quite as well? And of course there was those associations that they just didn't know about. There's sometimes you just don't know what you don't know. Any special willow I'm looking for? I'd like a small one. Pussy willow would be nice, actually. All right, so that's the exact scenario. The pine trees and the maples are all around a frog pond. Interesting. Well, that's you have to have a source of water for your trees. I don't know what I'm going to wind up putting in there. I could get a poplar and get. I have to call them up and talk to them and see what they have available. Could be a poplar. Could be, I don't know. Mary is wanting to know where I'm putting the pond. Right about where the front yard bird water is, and she's going to want to talk to me about that. I'll go over the plans with you, and you'll have final say, because of course it's your house. Let me get back over here and have a look. Okay, now I have the beginnings of the plan. Here's the plan. I plant members of the corylus genus, which is hazelnuts, in association with the pecan trees that I had started out with. Then I plant blueberries and wintergreen as a bridge between them. But since the property I'm working on had never had these specific specimens growing together, there's not much chance that the right kind of fungi would already be found in the soil. Furthermore, as most nurseries are now growing their stock in pots, each one kept separated from any of the other plants, there's little chance that those fungi would be found in there either. There might be, but they wouldn't have formed an association with anything. Incidentally, most of the nurseries, they're having to grow these plants in pots in full sun. If you're growing a blueberry at the nursery, it has to be grown in full sun because it's isolated. It can't be in a network. It's in a pot. Well, fortunately, I was able to find some inoculum of Ectomycorrhizal fungi. I've got some right here, and ericoid mycorrhizal fungi as well. These are the ericoid. Had to get them from England because English gardeners are the best. But with any luck, at least some of these species will be capable of forming a mutual network. Now, the question I've got right now is, will I need to add members of the Pinaceae family as well? Because the wintergreens like to grow in association with pines. Apparently, those two do have a mutual network. Will the wintergreen form a mutual network with the blueberries and say, the pecans and the hazelnuts, which are also ectomycorrhizal, but do they form associations with this specific type of fungi that interassociate between the blueberries and the wintergreens? I don't know. I I have no idea. I don't know. So this is going to be an experiment that we haven't completed yet. I've got the blueberries. I already had some, but I've got some more that just arrived today. And the wintergreens should be arriving here in another week or two. And we're going to go out there. We're going to plant them all together. I'm going to put some of this mycorrhizal inoculant down for them and cross our fingers and see what happens. And if they don't prosper, then I'll come in and take something out and plug some form of pine in there as well, and in the hopes that they'll all eventually come together and start playing nice with each other. Of course, um, just having that list of associations doesn't guarantee you're going to get a mutual network, but it gives you a starting place. And from there, we have to experiment because a lot of this information is just, we don't know yet. Returning to Dr. Simard's experiment, birch and fir trees were found to be in communication with each other, but not the cedar, right? In subsequent experiments, Dr. Simard was able to verify mutualism between cedars and maples. So we're talking western red cedar and maple trees, both of which are arbuscular mycorrhizal. All right. In a healthy forest system, we could expect to find that mutual network with a bridge. The bridge, in Carl's case, is, I think he said, the poplar trees. Here on this property, I'm working on using an Ulmus glutinosa, a European alder, and I also wanted to have a willow tree, which also fills that category. And willows are also kind of nice to have because of the potential to use them to help get cuttings started. Of all, I think I covered this a few weeks ago, of all of those do-it-yourself at home rooting hormone things, the willow actually does something other than just help prevent infection. So all of those dark blue listings that you see on these charts, things like the alders, acacias, the salicytes, all of those can be used to connect net-bearing trees with fruit-yielding trees, and of course vegetables as well. So there's some more of those lists and lists and lists. Whenever this comes out in the full book form, I'm not going to have it laid out by family. I'll have it laid out by the type of mycorrhizal association and the overall role that you would use these particular plants in whenever you're doing your design. Save you a lot of flipping back and forth and back and forth and back and forth through the reference materials. If you know you're looking for endomycorrhizal sources of protein and starches for your primary calories, that will be in one section, and then we'll follow it up with, now we're going to have our support species down here, we'll have our nitrogen fixtures down here, then we'll have our other little fill in the gaps sort of species down below that. It's going to be a lot of work because I'm going to have to go back to the original sources that this particular table was formulated from, find the necessary papers so I can properly cite them, because the person that put this particular table together didn't do that. I know, I'm making more work for myself. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, you don't know what you don't know, and you don't know until you try it out. Oh, cool. Yeah, pussy willow should root very easily. I think on the website there's an address on the website. Thank you, Johnny. Are you saying, Mary, are you saying pants are in or plants are in? The plants, yeah, the spring's plants are starting to come in. We've got the blueberries just arrived, and we'll be seeing some other cool stuff arrive here in the next couple of weeks. All right. All right, so universities receive their endowments from industry. This is the way it works. I mean, yeah, students do pay a tuition, but for the big things, industry pays for that wing for that particular type of study. They pay for the research, and they pay for research that they believe might help them in some way. And then there's private sources who also want research results to support whatever their particular agendas of the moment might be. Now, this moment, if a person is going to receive university funding for research into mycorrhizal associations, the only people out there willing to donate funding seem to be the ones that are trying to prove anthropogenic climate change. So if you're watching some of Dr. Samar's more recent stuff, she keeps on talking about climate change. Now you know why. She has to, otherwise she wouldn't get funding at all. Um, in order for us to get good quality research without the politically driven rhetoric, we have to become the industry that invests in the research. That means you and me and everybody else, and we have to build that industry. That means not just backyard garden experimentation, but full-scale agroforestry. That means farming for profit. But the only way you're going to be able to get somebody to invest in a farming for profit enterprise is if they see a working model of that. I can't just say, hey, there are these things called mycorrhizal fungi. You can form mutual networks and they go together. You can grow your trees and you can stack 6 different crops on top of each other. It's going to be great. Would you like to spend the money to get a farm started? And the average investor, if he's got any common sense at all, is going to go, yeah, I'd like to see that working first. So that's what we're working on, myself and anybody else that's interested in getting involved. Whenever we do this in our backyards, we're doing small scale working models demonstrating proof of concept. If I can get blueberries to grow in the shade of nut bearing trees here in the yard, then I can demonstrate that this works. You can do it. You can plant this association of plants together and have a highly productive system that might be of interest to commercial growers, especially if I've got pecans producing up here, hazelnuts producing down here, and blueberries producing right here, all at different times. It's 3 different yields. And then, of course, yeah, you can get the wintergreen out as well, and that's another yield. If you're mixing together things like the alders or poplars or willows, there are applications for those products from those trees as well. So individual citizen scientists play a role. By attempting to build functioning mutual networks on a smaller scale, the opportunity to demonstrate that it can be done. If it can be done profitably on a small scale, then it can be done profitably on the large scale. And the model for agriculture as a whole can change. That looming crisis that we're worried about, too many people, not enough resources, can be averted. And that is the bulk of the presentation. I close out the blog post by saying I thank you all for your kind attention. Switch back over here and just talk to some people for a bit. I think she's telling you to put pants on. Oh, cool. So you're going to try to get some wild ones, wild blueberries. Carl's going to try transplanting wild blueberries in the spring. That's going to be neat. If they're wild, then they should already have, if you can get some of the soil that goes along with them, they should already have some of that yummy, good mycorrhiza associating. Take a look around if you can, Carl, whenever you're finding the wild blueberries. Take a look around to see what is growing in association with them. It's a lot for the brain to absorb. Yeah, it is. And the unfortunate thing is that list alone is not going to get you there. That's just a starting point. Because once you've got that starting point, then you can do the experiments and find out what can actually work. And just planting those plants together does not necessarily mean you're going to get a network. You might have to do like Carl is doing, going out and finding the soil from the wild where this is actually working in nature, and then bringing that with the spores and some of those mycelium that are already there and importing them in to get the network started. And it might not even work the first time because those networks are going to take some time to grow. Chances are they're going to need to connect to the primary photosynthesizers first, the ones that are actually doing the work, before they can connect to the things that are at the bottom. And a lot of things are kind of speculatory right now. We don't really know. Well, like I said, we don't know what we don't know. We already know that sometimes signals can be sent, those predatory signals. can be sent from one tree to another in a mycorrhizal network. So, for example, insects move in at the edge of the forest or edge of a patch of trees that are associated, and they start munching on one tree. That one tree can send the message out through that network to the other trees in the network that this particular group of insects has moved in. And as a result, as a reflex, those trees are able to start producing chemicals in their leaves that make the leaves less attractive to the insects, which is kind of cool. But I'm wondering, is it not also possible for one tree in a network or one plant in a network to manufacture a chemical and send that out through its roots as a root exudate? And some of them do send out root exudates that are repellent to certain insects. If that could be taken up by the network and passed on to the other trees in the network, wouldn't that be a hoot? Okay, mountain type trees, mountain laurel perhaps freehandly made. If it's mountain laurel is one of those ericaceous and ectomycorrhizal associating trees. Um, well, yeah, okay. In nature, yeah, the trees are surviving without any care. Nobody's watering them, nobody's fertilizing them, nobody's weeding them, nobody is doing anything. They're relying upon the rain that falls and the sun that shines and the wind that blows, and that's it. If anybody's doing any pruning, it's the animals, and somehow nature manages to make it do just fine. Yeah, well, get out there, get some good pictures of it. See if you can find out what kind of trees they are. I know if you do a Google image search, if you get a good picture of a plant and then you use Google, yeah, deer do some printing. You use Google to search that image. Google can quite often tell you what plant that is, or at least get you in the ballpark of what the plant is. Some of the wonders of modern technology. Um, have you read anything about mycorrhizae morphing to the plants around them? I've heard a little bit about that. For example, oh yeah, I was talking with John about this earlier when he was on the phone with me. He called me up earlier tonight and we were talking about this. All right, so ectomycorrhizal fungi are the ones that usually have fruiting bodies that you can see above ground, mushrooms. Most of the arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi are the fruiting bodies are so small that we can't see them with the naked eye, and typically they're underground, tiny little things. But ectomycorrhizae do occasionally have fruiting bodies that appear above ground. Chanterelles are an example. Shiitake might possibly be one. Namako might possibly be one. Morels might possibly be one. Boletes almost definitely are one, but we don't know exactly which species they associate with, which is what makes farming boletes almost impossible. But here's something interesting. If morels happen to be a mycorrhizal fungi, some type of mycorrhizal fungi, because of the associations that they ordinarily have, we know where to find them in the woods. These are typically ectomycorrhizal species, but I have also found them growing in association with pears. So it's possible that morels, if they are the fruiting body of a mycorrhizal fungi, they might be one that's actually able to go with arbuscles in some cases, or with surrounding the roots as an ectomycorrhizal fungi in other cases. So they would adapt to their environment and make associations with whatever happens to be available. Um, we do know that whenever new spores come from a fruiting body and they fall down and they start spreading out and trying to find food and form those associations, that they can adapt to the food supply that they have available to them. This is one of the things that makes using mushrooms for bioremediation so interesting. An oyster mushroom can adapt itself to eat oil, for example, which is just crazy. You wouldn't want to eat those oyster mushrooms, obviously, but they could soak it up and get rid of that oil spill. Um, Crazy stuff that mushrooms can do. So it's possible, yes, that mycorrhizae could morph to adapt to the plants around them, which is just kind of mind-boggling. Hello there, come on, Homestead. You're late. How are you doing out there? Yeah, deer love blueberry bushes. Yeah. Well, deer are like everybody else. They like to eat. Well, we're coming up on about an hour now. Does anybody have any particular questions that they'd like to ask? I may not know the answer, but I can always find out. Still out on the phone, huh? Right. Better late than never. And there's always the replay. Well, I tried to. Living soil. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. You never know. Because if you just read something on the internet, that doesn't mean that it's true. This is one of the reasons why, once again, we have to go out, we have to get some trees, we have to bring them in, we have to plant them, we have to make sure that we can get these mycorrhizal networks started up, hopefully mutual networks, and verify it, see if it actually works. Because we're not going to be able to convince a big farmer that has 500 acres that they're trying to grow for a profit on that that it's worth them taking that risk without proving that it works first. Okay, Carl is asking, you think I can get the pecan tree to grow amongst maples? I'm not sure what would connect them. Poplar would do it, willow would do it, alder would do it. Those kinds of trees would do it. If you look at the list of mycorrhizal associations on the blog post, the ones in dark blue allow you to have things like your pine trees and your maples growing together and forming a mutual network. I think you said you had poplars out there. All the same, if you can give that pecan tree a little bit of its own light, even 6 hours a day, would be good to get it started. What else we got? Yeah, we do have a maple in the backyard. An old silver maple, big old silver maple. Weak wood, not really tasty seeds, but you can eat them. And I do need to get another either willow or alder back there. I had one planted, but it didn't make it through the winter last year. I got them imported from Portugal just before all of this uncommon common cold craziness started up, and I put one in the front yard on the side and then one in the backyard where my hedgerow is, but the one in the back didn't survive the winter. They were already coming out of dormancy whenever they arrived, and it was still dead of winter here. But we got one to survive, and I'll be able to get more trees started off of that one. So in the backyard right now, we've got that one pecan tree. That's in the middle of the annual vegetable garden, which is about 60 foot by 60 foot, which is about the spread of the pecan tree whenever it gets full size. Kind of the way the people that used to live here on this continent would do their gardening. They grow annuals while they're waiting for the trees to get back whenever one of them gets out of the forest, one of the big ones comes down, because that big one, once it gets big, that's enough food for one person for a year. That one tree produces. Yeah, I can do cuttings from the alder trees. They should take from cuttings really well, Mary. But all the way around there, I've got a hedgerow, and well, I've started the hedgerow. It doesn't have all the trees in it yet. Right now, it's Elaeagnus multiflora at the far, what is that, northwest corner, far northwest corner. We've got the Elaeagnus. That's a nitrogen fixing tree, arbuscular mycorrhizal, followed by hazelnut. The two hazelnuts are Jefferson and then an Etta, which are two different cultivars of hazelnut. Then we've got, after those, I put in a redbud tree. And then over here on this side, we're going to have Doris for hazelnut, Cargena arborescens, which is a Siberian Pea Shrub. Then back over here, continuing it out, we're just going to alternate 2 hazelnut trees, nitrogen fixing tree, 2 hazelnut trees, nitrogen fixing tree, 2 hazelnuts, nitrogen fixer, 2 hazelnuts, nitrogen fixer. And I've got them crowded. I've got them close together. There's only 6 foot of space in between them. So they will grow up and they'll form an interlaced hedge, which will do a couple things for me. One, it'll block the wind, which will be nice for creating some shelter for that area where I'm going to be having for at least 20 or 30 years some annual crops growing. So it'll provide them with shelter, not only from winds coming through and blowing off soil, but also from cross contamination if there's some wild pollen passing through. Hi, Amy at Grace Family Homestead. Yes, you are late. I'm going to dock your allowance. Donna, we have 1/3 of an acre. I know it's not much, but right now the perennials that we have planted, once they get mature, are enough to feed 2 people. We should be able to feed at least 4 people off of the third of an acre with just perennials. And then we have annuals on top of that too, to fill in the little gaps in the diet and have a little extra to sell. There's no reason why, if you've got a small property with a house on it, you can't plant it up in such a way that you either can grow enough first time you ever heard of it, huh? To grow enough food to feed yourself and your family, or to grow enough to pay your bills. We should be able to get enough to pay property taxes from just selling the nuts that this property produces. And then whatever we don't eat. And we're probably going to eat quite a few. I think that hedgerow altogether, when I finally get done with that third of an acre, will be about 48 hazelnut trees, and about a third of that in nitrogen fixers. I'm also picking as nitrogen fixers trees that also produce a yield of their own. For example, the flowers of the redbud tree are edible. Put those in salads, make vinegar out of it. Use that as the base for your vinaigrette in your salad. Press the oil of the hazelnut to get your oil. Oil from hazelnuts incidentally has more oleic acid than olive oil, so it's a healthier oil than even olive oil. Then we have the Siberian Pea Shrub, grows all the way to zone 7. And as soon as I'm ready to start exporting some of the little seedlings from the pea shrub, I'll be trying them out in zone 8B and zone 9 as well. I've got some friends that I want to ship a few samples to just to see if maybe possibly they can survive a little bit further south than the textbook says that they can. I'm kind of keen to find out, because you don't get into pigeon pea territory until you get to around zone 10 and further south. Pigeon peas are pretty much the same kind of plant, but more adapted to more tropical climates. Redbud is a nitrogen fixer. It's a member of the Fabaceae family. It forms associations with bacteria in the soil. The bacteria take the nitrogen out of the air and pass that along to the plant in exchange for sugars. You pull it up by the roots. If the bacteria are in your soil, this is the caveat, they have to be in your soil. If the bacteria aren't there, then it isn't fixing any nitrogen. But hopefully, if it's a place where redbuds are growing, the bacteria will be there. You pull the tree up by the roots and have a look at those roots, you'll see the little tiny nodules on the roots. So you should be able to find nitrogen nodules on the roots of the redbuds. Yeah, just with the section of driveway that I've got, I can get quite a few trees started, and then sell off the trees. $5 a tree is not a whole lot, but it makes a few house payments. Conflicting information about redbuds. Interesting. Who would be saying that they don't fix nitrogen? I have heard some conflicting information on Catalpa. I would think that Catalpa would be a nitrogen fixer, but I pulled up quite a few specimens from the backyard a couple of days ago while I was getting an order ready to ship. I did not see any nitrogen nodules on those at all. But I did see them on the redbud that I transplanted, and I did see them on the black locusts that I pulled up. I pulled up some black locusts and shipped them off yesterday to David the Good. He's doing a little food forest down in Alabama, and so he expressed an interest in having some black locusts, so I pulled some up and shipped them out to him. All right. What's the name of? You can always ask me, John. My hazelnuts are, we have Jefferson cultivar of hazelnut. We have Doris cultivar of hazelnut, which are both blight-resistant hybrids produced by the University of Oregon to replace the old Barcelonas that they got after Eastern filbert blight jumped over the mountains and started infecting the orchards out there. They developed some new varieties which are blight-resistant. I have as cross-pollinators Etta cultivar and Yamhill cultivar of hazelnut. So I have 4 different cultivars of hazelnut. And all of those together, I think one of them might still be under patent as a patented plant. I'm going to have to double check and make sure. If it is, then I can't sell that without getting the necessary licensing to sell a patented plant. But I can always take the nuts and plant the nuts and grow a seedling and sell the seedling, because the seedlings will have mixed genetics of the parents, and I can do that. If you don't want to wait for me to get my improved genetics seedlings of hazelnuts, which is still going to be another year or two, try Forest Agriculture Products, which is the nursery from Mark Shepard's New Forest Farm up in Wisconsin. He is more than happy to sell you seedling hazelnuts at $5 a piece. You just have to buy them in bundles of 25 at a time. If you buy, I believe it's up to 100 plants at a time from him, he'll knock the price down to $4 a plant. So if you're interested in going with hazelnuts in a big way, I think it's a good idea. I think it's a great idea. And Marks are growing all the way up into zone 3, incidentally. The ones I've got are guaranteed to grow down to zone 9 and up to zone 4, but Marks are guaranteed to grow as far north as zone 3. Hello, Flavors and Textures. We are just about to wrap up. Hello, Tony at Walsh Farms. We've been going for about an hour now. It's called New Forest Farm. It's a member of the Organic Valley. Carl was asking what farm was that in Wisconsin. The farm is called New Forest Farm. It's part of the Organic Valley Cooperative. And the nursery is called Forest Agriculture Products, or Forest Agriculture Enterprises. Actually, I've got this saved to my favorites. Let me open up a tab real quick and look and double check and make sure. I don't want to give you the wrong information. I've got a link. I've got a link I can put in here. There you go. All right, this is the website for Mark Shepard's nursery. There, forestag.com. He does have black walnuts for sale, incidentally, if somebody was curious about getting some black walnuts. He's got those for sale. He ordinarily would have English walnuts as well, but he's sold out right now. So Donna, if you want a black walnut tree, I think it's around $5 or $6 a piece. I don't know if you can buy them singly, but that's a pretty good price. I really like finding nurseries that have cheap prices because, you know, I'm cheap. I think our trees are going to run $7.99, which is, it's not $5, but then again, if we're charging $5 a tree, I don't know if it would make much money. But $7.99 is not too bad. It's at least comparable with what some other nurseries are charging. Of course, you're going to find nurseries out there that will be more than happy to charge you $50 a tree, which is just crazy. Then again, those trees usually we're talking about 2 or 3 year old trees. I highly recommend that you don't get 2 or 3 year old trees, because by that time they've started circling. The roots have started circling the bottom of the pot. They're root bound. They get out into the new circumstances and they go, well, gee, we're used to growing in a circle here. I don't know what we're supposed to do. And they don't grow so well. they take a while before they can get adjusted and adapted to the new situations. And in some cases, you might even have to just cut the roots and let them start growing again, which sets the tree back. So you might get a bigger tree that's 2 or 3 years old or even older, but by the time it's finally adapted to the new place that it's planted in and ready to grow, you may as well have just spent less money, got a smaller tree, and let it grow in that spot from the very beginning. So that's what I recommend people do: is don't spend a lot of money on trees. Find some place that sells them for cheap. Get bare root trees that are 1 year old, and plant those and let them grow into the space. And I think you'll be a lot better off for it. If the tree winds up dying for some reason, you're only out $5 or $10, as opposed to $50 for a tree that just died on you. That's the way I'd recommend doing it. And of course, once you've got a tree established, propagate your own trees. Learn how to take cuttings and root cuttings and graft and grow things from seed. Which, being a small nursery operator, seemed to be putting me out of business, but that's okay. Because people are still going to need their original tree stock. And I think that if I sold one tree at a profit of $1 to every person on planet Earth, I'd be a billionaire, and I'd be happy with that. So I'm fine. More than happy to help people learn how to do it. All right, guys, we are over an hour now. I just wanted to thank you all for coming out and watching the presentation. Do please visit the website, greencountryagroforestry.com. Do please read the blog and copy those pictures off, download them to your computer, and print off your own copies of that Mycorrhizal Association list that's available there. It's free. It's absolutely free. It doesn't cost you anything. Jake Griggs says, I'm going to get 5 acres in the near future. Awesome. What can I grow? You got zone 5. Donna, I would like for you to go to this particular link here that I'm getting ready to share with you. Copy this and put it down here. This is plantsforafuture.org. Follow this link here, Donna. Plantsforafuture.org. It's got a database that you can plug in the parameters that you have, your growing conditions, your soil conditions. So you can put in your soil, you can put in your zone, put in what kind of trees you're looking for. Are you looking for trees for food, for fiber, for medicine, for what? You can even specify, are you looking for more of your staples, like your proteins and your starches, or are you looking for just the calories, which is going to be a lot more inclusive in the edibility rating of stuff. You'll be able to find everything you need to get a really good start on 5 acres by following that link at plantsforafuture.org. Cross-reference with that mycorrhizal list that I put up on the website, on the Green Country Agroforestry website, because one piece of information they don't have at Plants for a Future is what kind of mycorrhizal associations those plants are known for. So between those two resources, you've got a great starting point to figure out what you can plant and grow and get good productivity off of 5 acres. Conrad Homestead got a phone. Paul, you missed it. You missed it. John says grafting isn't hard. Just pay attention to what you're doing. Yes, and there are a lot of really good tutorials on grafting available, even on YouTube. I would look at Twisted Tree Farm and Edible Acres for 2 YouTube channels for looking at grafting. Actually, Twisted Tree Farm has a very good, like up close, you can see exactly what he's doing when he makes the cuts and everything, grafting tutorial. Also, Stefan Subkowiak, who is listed in my my featured channels, runs a permaculture orchard out of Quebec, Canada, and he does tutorials on grafting as well. He's got an entire course on grafting and pruning. I do think you have to pay money for it, though. That's okay. I mean, it's good information. If you watch his videos long enough, eventually he will show you how to do everything. If you want the information all together right now, pay for the course. All right. Hi, Kitty. Yes, I think I've got a kitty that wants some attention. That's really all I've got for you for right now, people. Thank you very much for coming in and joining us tonight. And we'll be back next week with, what am I coming back next week with? Oh, yes. roles and layers. So we're going to be talking about the roles that different plants play in your permaculture arrangement. What are they there for? Are we talking about this is a fruit tree? This is a nut tree. Okay, these are for food. Is this a nitrogen fixer? Is this a bioaccumulator? Is this one for biomass for making your mulch? Different roles, different things that various plants will do for your ecosystem, and then of course what layers they go in. And people do sometimes conflate roles and layers with each other, so we'll get into that. Hopefully, I'll have enough to fill up an entire hour. We'll see. Oh my gosh, Paul scored over 100 plants yesterday. That is awesome. That is very cool. All right, thank you very much, and I will catch you next time.